Right, morning everybody, or afternoon or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're dialing in from. Welcome back to the InSport webinar series. We've had a bit of time off over the summer, and as September's been unfolding, we've been busy planning a range of events. We thought October would be a good time to restart these webinar series, and what better place to start than Cristiano Ronaldo's move to Manchester United a few months ago. We'll probably get a little bit of time towards the end of the webinar to pick up the latest news this week. Of course, the Newcastle United takeover by the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund, and I'll probably tap up one of our guests to have a chat about that with us later. I'm delighted that we're joined though this morning by Jordan Williamson. Jordan is a commercial manager at CSM Sport and Entertainment. And also Dan Plumley, a really good friend and colleague of mine from Sheffield Hallam University, a guy that I've done all of my research with and work very closely with. So good morning, both of you.
Morning.
Hey, folks. So, I mean, let's cut to the chase. Cristiano Ronaldo to Manchester United, match made in heaven, should improve Manchester United's sporting performance and is hugely important for their commercial side of the business. Jordan, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. Just give us a kind of quick rundown of what you think the opportunities might be for this move and the type of things we should really be looking out for.
I mean, I think the fact we're even having this conversation shows there's a huge buzz and interest around the partnership. And admittedly, I'm a Chelsea fan, but not a week goes by where I'm not looking at what United are doing and what Ronaldo is doing. So I think the same can be said for most football fans, and naturally that attention and that kind of engagement from fans and football fans in general will basically drive interest in the club and therefore partnerships with the club, which can ultimately lead to more revenue. I think it's not quite as easy, and that maybe there's a few kind of myths we can debunk along the way around what that ultimately looks like. But I do think what it will do is drive a spike in interest, and it should open up more conversations around partnerships for Manchester United, but also for Ronaldo himself. So we can kind of unpick that a bit more, if you like.
Yeah. So it's interesting, kind of suggesting there's going to be some good commercial benefits potentially here, but we'll unpick those later on. Dan, from your perspective, what do you think the real drivers were for Manchester United, firstly, behind this deal, and then I guess for Cristiano separately?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Jordan says there, I think there's opportunities here for both parties, and it will be mostly positive. I think if you look at some of the interesting things that we've already pulled out of this deal, the transfer fee is relatively low, and that's probably linked to Cristiano Ronaldo's age. I know there's add-ons and things like that, but the net cost to Manchester United is relatively cheap in market terms, and they can afford this kind of player. They're one of the few clubs that can. And I think that's one aspect of it from a cost point of view. And if that then generates, let's focus on the sporting performance as a starting point. If that then generates a successful, return on the pitch, and if we look at Champions League qualification, we know that's worth minimum £50 million to an English team, and prize money associated with those competitions. So you can see the kind of trade-off there from a financial point of view. I think Gordon was probably alluding to some of those myths around what we see around shirt sales as an example, and that the transfer fee and everything will be paid off overnight, and that just isn't the case. And I think we're trying to, that message is now getting out there more and more. But the interest spike that Jordan mentioned there, I think is really important, because, I've been asked a lot already around this transfer. How much money is he going to generate for Manchester United, and when will we see that money? And at the minute, we don't know the figure that it will end up at, and we don't know how that will be made up. But that's part of the longer game that Manchester United are playing with this, because it's that leverage and that interest that they'll be hoping to turn into, tangible revenue. And that's no different to the other superstar that we've seen move this summer and Lionel Messi transfer to PSG. So it'll take some time to see those absolute figures. But I think that, from a cost perspective, relatively low for Manchester United, and a chance to leverage that in revenue moving forward.
So if I push you then, what sort of total cost do you think we're looking at really for this deal for Manchester United?
Yeah, I think if you add the numbers together crudely in terms of transfer fee, the bonuses that we do know about, and the salary, which of course is always a little bit subjective, but the kind of good estimates that I've seen would suggest it's around £385,000 a week. If we add all that together over a 2-year contract, then we're looking at a net cost of around 60 million in the region of. And that's where then you can start to work off that from saying, okay, so if that generates this new commercial interest, or if that generates a new deal, or if that generates better sporting performance and more prize money, then you can start to recoup some of that money. I suppose there's a couple of things that, and I'd like to get Jordan's take on this as well. One thing is around the ownership structure and the share sale that we've seen this week, which we might come on to. And there's a kind of cynical view on that. But I think, Jordan, from your perspective, I'm not convinced that Manchester United have that much left to sell from a commercial side of things. I don't know what you kind of think about that in terms of how Ronaldo might help with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, just touching back onto that buzz we've mentioned, and we can kind of use these kind of fairly generic words, but a way to kind of tap in and actually see the evidence of that is, of course, social media. And we've seen that since Ronaldo joined, United's Instagram following have gone up by 5 million, which is, I mean, we throw millions of numbers around in football all the time, but we've got to remember that's a lot of people as well that are actively clicking to follow the club. And they've doubled their TikTok as well, albeit it's a fairly new platform for them. So being able to kind of double that is potentially easier than doubling your Instagram following. But there's kind of two like numbers there which show that this kind of buzz we talk about is translating into followers and people being engaged with the club. So like we said, there's going to be positives, but they've still got to convert that interest, that fan engagement into partnerships. And I mean, I do this for a living, or attempt to anyways, and it's not easy. It takes time, it takes negotiation, and as you mentioned there, Dan, we've got to look at as well, you've got to have something to sell. And so the question I kind of started to think about was what inventory do Manchester United have left? Like their front of shirt deal has just been done, so that'll be a long-term partnership. That's one of the higher ticket items, if you like. I think their sleeves still got a couple of years left to run. They already have 24 global partners, so every one of them will get exclusivity in the sector they're in, whether that be kind of betting or finance or whatever. They have a load of financial and regional partners as well. So there's clever ways to do it. And as we're seeing in the space, new sectors are being created as well. I think like cryptocurrency is something that's really interesting. A couple of years ago, the thought of doing a crypto partner with a football club wasn't really a thing, whereas now they're happening left, right, and centre. And actually have a tangible example I can touch on here, which will hopefully kind of show the value and what could potentially happen with Ronaldo and United. We're yet to see it, but we have actually seen it happen at PSG with what we're calling the Messi effect over there. But they were in negotiations with a crypto partnership before Messi came on board. Messi came on board during those negotiations, and the actual value of the partnership doubled. Wow. And so that is a real tangible example of this impacting and having that effect. The brand themselves were thrilled. They saw that there was going to be loads more engagement, more conversions, ultimately more customer acquisition. So they were like, brilliant, fantastic. The club were obviously thrilled because what they thought was going to be one partnership is now double that, and they've not really had to do a whole lot more. Obviously, the Messi deal was probably quite something, but in terms of the commercial team, that kind of shows you those real benefits. And there's loads of things you can kind of do with digital assets and inventory. But in terms of those big ticket items, which might kind of instantly offset the Ronaldo cost, apart from the training ground, which is really expensive. And again, they're going to want a long-term brand to come in and spend a lot of money on that, which kind of, you're speaking to a certain number of elite brands in that space. It'll be interesting to see how they kind of look to make those partnerships happen and see what spaces they can tap into. I think where it will really come to life is in renewals. So all of these partnerships will have an end date at some point, and they'll look to renew those partnerships, and having the Ronaldo card in your back pocket and being able to actually uplift those existing partnerships into kind of higher level partnerships or renewals at a higher cost is something that's going to be really powerful for them. But equally, that's, like I said, it's not offsetting £60 million worth of cost. It's going to be incremental, and it's going to happen over a longer period of time than some people might like to believe, I guess.
Yeah, there's a really interesting point in that, and the article that Dan and I put together on the kind of Ronaldo effect alluded to that uplift that you've just described. So there's a big wash, wasn't there, when when he signed and the queues outside Old Trafford queuing up for the replica shirts, what I've noticed on their socials is just a significant push all around CR7. And if I'm one of the other players, I'm thinking, do I still play for Manchester United, or is it simply Cristiano? But the data that we're starting to see, so the 12.5 million likes or whatever it was on Instagram upon when the signing was announced, the data that you've just given us about the kind of the growth in TikTok, the fact that Manchester United have often claimed they've got 600 million plus followers all over the world and that type of thing. And I'm then thinking, so playing performance has been dipping, or has dipped, hasn't it, since Sir Alex Ferguson retired, notwithstanding a couple of odd successes. Generally speaking, though, sporting success is lower. Style of play hasn't been overly attractive. As a Manchester United fan, it's been pretty horrible to watch at times. So you get all of that extra data. So all those extra shirt sales, all those extra media engagements, digital assets and whatever else. Does a shirt manufacturer like Adidas all of a sudden become under a bit more pressure when they come to renegotiate their manufacturing deal? I think it's in 2023 when that's up for renewal. Coincidentally, at the end of his 2-year contract that he's allegedly signed, albeit there's an option for a year. So does that strengthen Manchester United's leverage in that negotiation, so they can say, well, look, we were selling X many million shirts in a year. We've signed Cristiano. That's increased our sales a little bit further. So you're going to pay us at least what you've been paying us over the last 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, whatever the length of the deal is, to maintain their position as one of the biggest shirt selling manufacturers that there is. It's quite a long-winded question there, isn't it? So
is that for me or Dan? Or
yeah, I think I'll come to you first, and then I'll ask Dan to give a bit of the extend it a little bit, because your background in commercial endorsement, that type of thing, you'll be on the other side of the table for some of these deals, won't you? So where does the leverage sit is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like, shirt deals are very, like, they're just complicated. There's so many moving parts. It's not just like, here's a number, you can be our shirts. Like, there's just so many intricacies that go into it. But I think the kind of overall answer to the question is, yes, Ronaldo definitely strengthens their position. Ultimately, what Adidas are interested in is how many Manchester United shirts can we sell, and Ronaldo helps them sell more of those. So ultimately, if you're breaking it down into a very simple kind of leverage, who's where on the seesaw, then it puts Manchester United in a stronger position when renegotiating that deal. There will be numerous other elements that come into it, but I think he's definitely kind of a bit of an ace card for them, and will kind of help them drive a better deal for themselves. Yeah. To what extent, I think, is probably the overarching theme of this conversation, is like, to what extent there is so much more that goes into these things, and Ronaldo is just one part of that puzzle. Like you said, there are a few other players that play for United who will also kind of think that they help drive sales of shirts, and they're as important, and they certainly will be, especially kind of back in their home countries and things where people are following them. There will be other factors at play, but in a short answer to your long question is yes, it will help.
Yeah. Sorry, the problem with topics like this that I really, really enjoyed talking about is that I end up asking really, really long-winded questions, and then I cut all the airtime down from my guests. So I do apologise. Dan, that article we put together, we talked about that kind of extended leverage. If you were at Manchester United, do you think this deal is about that initial sporting performance bump that they're trying to achieve through the player acquisitions? Or do you think they've got a real eye on the commercial side of it? Because we've talked, haven't we, historically about the issues that some fans have had about the ownership. There certainly will be a feel-good factor at Old Trafford as a consequence of this signing, and it perhaps makes the owner's life a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that is the other side of it for me. And I think if you look at what's happened as a chain of events, we could probably push this back to the fallout from the European Super League in the short term. But longer than that, there's been a very large part of that fan base that has been very anti-Glazers and has been, very vocal about what they think of the owners of that football club, and some of the teaching, of course, that you and I have done, Rob, around the broader sports economics and ownership models leads you down roads to talk about things like profit maximization, which is that American sporting model. And actually, a lot of people think that the Glazers are in this for their own profit, and that is probably, reading between the lines, I think that's a reasonable argument to make. But the interesting thing here with what happened with the Super League and then what's followed since is that kind of PR backlash, and remember the protests on the pitch, of course, that got the game against Liverpool, called off at that stage. And then look at what's transpired since. And, not just Ronaldo, you mentioned earlier around there are other players that play for Manchester United, and they have signed two other fairly significant superstars this summer, Jadon Sancho and Rafael Varane. And then Ronaldo being almost the kind of icing on the cake near deadline day when people thought he might be going across the road to Manchester City. That was a real kind of, the narrative in the fan base seems to have shifted for me. And it's now all about Ronaldo. And the ownership problem has just kind of been pushed to one side, notwithstanding the fact, as we were looking at this week, that the Glazers have sold some of their shares in the club when the share price has increased slightly. So we're back to that same argument around the ownership structure. But I think that's the other side of this for me. As Jordan put there, and I'm completely in agreement with that. There will be commercial benefits to this deal. Of course, there will for both parties. But the other side in the short term is, one, the sporting performance aspect that he can bring, and two, the kind of PR exercise around the ownership structure, and actually just that being a bit of a feel-good transfer as much as anything, because he is coming towards the end of his career. He could probably play until he's 40, no doubt, looking at the physical condition that he's in. But that's really interesting from a commercial point of view, because that leverage has an expiry date, and we could contrast that to a transfer that didn't happen this summer in Kylian Mbappe, and that transfer will probably happen at some point. But part of the reason PSG, I suppose, are desperate to hang on to him is because that leverage from a commercial sense I think he's 21 now, if I've got my ages right, that has real growth potential throughout the term of his career. So there's some interesting narrative around that as well. But yeah, absolutely, Rob. I think there's another layer to this, which is the ownership situation and how that's been kind of bubbling under the surface for the last few months or so.
So I'm going to draw you there on that share price question, because we have seen this year the Glazers dispose of, I think it's around about 12% of their holding now. So they've diluted their position quite significantly, albeit in shares that don't hold the major voting rights.
Yeah.
If I'm being cynical, do you think there is a play here on behalf of the Glazers to increase the value of that share price with a view to sale? I'm going to ask Dan you that first, and I'm going to come to Jordan to talk about the kind of going back to these commercial benefits and how those commercial benefits actually can benefit the ownership through increases in share price. So Dan, just for you, do you think there is a level of, pure profit maximization strategy going on here, irrespective of the playing performance that they might achieve?
Yes, I think to put it bluntly, and that example this week kind of highlights that for me a little bit. Obviously, without asking them directly and getting them to give you an honest answer, that they would never kind of probably make that admission. But the signs there that we're looking at suggest that is a reasonable play to make. And as we know not just the Glazers, but we've seen this kind of wave of American investment in English football and into European football, and in their home country where they've been owning their own sports teams, and the way they run those franchises, they are geared to make profit for their owner. That's a huge part of that system. So it makes sense that it would happen the other way if they came in to buy some of these football clubs. And I think, we are seeing a little bit of that with the Glazers, of course. And again, of course, Ronaldo will only help with that from a financial perspective.
Yeah, so Jordan, just to unpack that a little bit, we talked earlier about infantry and what might be available. Do you think there's and sitting on your side of the table when you're negotiating these deals, you'll do arrangements with clubs as entities, you'll speak to individual athletes, I presume. Mm-hmm. Is there ever a discussion really about how we improve the overall business integrity, and not necessarily to look for sale, but clearly in this instance would help to improve share price if it was done properly?
Yeah, I think so. It depends. I think Ronaldo is a unique proposition. There's not many athletes like him on the planet who, he's got 353 million followers on Instagram, and United have 50 million. So it's very rare that the club is seeing the player provide more in terms of kind of global appeal, kind of the authenticity, the narrative they can use. And CR7 is almost like a kind of, well, it is a business and a kind of entire entity in its own right. And that's unique. You've only got a handful of athletes that can offer that. So I think that's a really unique proposition and something that would have definitely been discussed around Ronaldo in particular. I can't say I've ever had the privilege of having that as a nice thing to have in a negotiation. Not yet anyways. But I think in terms of that integrity and the relationships and the network that Ronaldo and CR7 and his community and his team have, and that they can bring into United and vice versa, I think that would have been really powerful. And I think, like, leading back to that word of integrity and what that means in kind of a wider business sense, and when you're having those top level investor conversations and you can wheel in Ronaldo effectively, it's a pretty powerful tool as far as that's concerned. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to pull at that thread a little bit, actually, about the wheeling Ronaldo in. Dan referred to his physical appearance. I think we've all seen his physical appearance, Dan, and as a 41-year-old man, I'm very jealous of the way he looks. On a serious point, though, Cristiano Ronaldo has a massive following. Manchester United have a significant following. There's going to be a tension there, isn't there? And there's going to be deals that neither party can actually activate because of each commodities, if we use that terminology, the position that those commodities have in those in territories. And actually, we also have something to do with image rights, where we have to have a certain number of players representing the brand, haven't we?
Yeah, definitely. So I think what you're kind of referring to there is like I said, that balance of power, if you like, and none of us were in those rooms having those negotiations at that time. But what I do know is that where it leveled out, and this varies from player to player and club to club, and it is a negotiation tool. But Ronaldo coming on board with Manchester United, existing relationships and deals aside that he's kind of got ongoing, he won't be able to partner with any brands that are direct competitors of Manchester United's global partners. So I mentioned they've got 24, so there's quite a few of them there. And so those partners and those sectors, Ronaldo in his individual capacity, he won't be able to go off and do partnerships there. So there is a slight lens of negativity that you could look through in terms of being like, actually, that's restricting certain things he could do. The flip side of that is that any club he's at will have that. That's what the kind of global partnership offers you. And if you're a brand coming to partner with United, and that's part of the benefit, is that by doing that global partnership, you secure the fact that Ronaldo is not going to go off and partner with any of your direct competitors. That is something that United can offer, and that will be really attractive to certain brands, because in some cases, depending on certain things, certainly a regional partnership, sometimes a global partnership will be equally expensive, if not cheaper, with United than you would be partnering with Ronaldo on his own. So you could actually find more value and a better partnership and gain that exclusivity through a partnership with United as opposed to Ronaldo. And in that guise, you can also use an image of Ronaldo in his Manchester United shirt, which as an individual you wouldn't be able to do. He'd have to be in kind of plain Nike or CR7 clothing. So that's all to kind of do with the various rights and things, which is a whole other webinar if we had time. But whilst you can use Ronaldo in his United shirt as a global partner, you can't use him on his own. So as a partnership with United, you have to use the players in, it varies, but from a rule of 3 to 5 players. So Ronaldo will have to be with a flank of other players either side of him, or however they use it. We can find loads of examples to share where if you look at Team Viewer and anything they're doing, it will be a minimum of 3 players in any of their advertising. So that is where the kind of restriction around how brands can actually access and use Ronaldo can be somewhat limited through team partnerships. So it's not like, right, partner with Manchester United and you get 5 days a year with Ronaldo. He can come to kind of dinner with you guys. You can do as many photo shoots as you like. It's a lot more restricted than that, notwithstanding Ronaldo's only got so many hours in the day. It's exactly the same as the rest of us. And he's got his own partners, United's partners, as well as the actual fact of playing football. So that's one of the main restricting factors. But yeah, the brands that partner with United will only get a certain amount of access to him, and that will largely be through digital inventory, but they can only use him as a group of players, not just this is the Ronaldo kind of, partnership. It's got to be a united partnership. So that's something that people can sometimes overlook when they're kind of entering these partnerships for the first time.
Yeah, Dan, you're nodding. What are you thinking?
Yeah, no, I find that side of it really interesting because, these are the kind of, they seem really basic questions, Jordan. A lot of what we get asked, particularly in sort of some of the media work, and it's almost like it's so black and white, and it's absolutely not. So those things around, it has to be 3 to 5 players, and even within that, there's no guarantee that you would get Ronaldo.
Yeah, precisely.
So even then, Manchester United have signed Ronaldo, and we're talking about all the positives and the commercial benefits and things that might come with it. But there'll be some commercial partners that will be a little bit disappointed, even under these next couple of years and the agreements, because they perhaps won't get access to that superstar. I was just looking at some of the numbers, Rob, from the article around, trying to measure it that we were talking around, and the figures from Juventus are interesting. I know it's not direct cause and effect, but their commercial revenue for the 2 seasons prior to Ronaldo was £106 million and £129 million, and then the 2 seasons following Ronaldo, 164 and 165 million. Now, I'm not claiming direct cause and effect there, of course, but he will have had an impact, and I think that's where.
I think they had a few important renewals in that time, didn't they?
Yeah, they did as well. And interestingly, one of the things that you were talking about, Jordan, around that activation or the digital aspect of it, they signed a new one with Konami in Japan around the time of Ronaldo signing, and they actually went on record and cited the Ronaldo effect as being part of the reason why they wanted to get into that deal with Juventus. And similar to the PSG example you mentioned earlier with the cryptocurrency, it actually inflated the value of that deal. So there is some evidence that we can draw upon to say, there will be this tangible benefit that we're talking about, but on the flip side of it, some of the partners will be disappointed because they won't get access to him.
It's going to be it's going to be really interesting for us to look at that commercial development this year and what they might try and pin on Ronaldo and where it might go. And I hadn't even thought about the cryptocurrency side of things, Jordan, because Manchester United haven't really operated in that space. But you're right, the prevalence is increasing. And then I'm thinking to myself, there's a whole bunch of stuff getting done around Chili's and the Socios blockchain as a consequence of sport and the fan token idea. And Socios have launched fan tokens with lots of major clubs. Do you think Manchester United might be one of the next in line?
Oh, I'm sure they're having conversations. I'm sure that, in terms of those deals are, really interesting. And I have no doubt they're in the thick of some conversations around that. So we'll have to wait and see, I think.
Wait and see on that. That's a really interesting question. Came in, I think, about 10 minutes ago, actually. I was trying to get us to the point where we could just feed it into the conversation, but I didn't manage it as per usual. Obviously, last night, news broke that Newcastle United had been formally now taken over by Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund, that the PIF, taking the 80% share. Also interesting, not a lot being made of this, but the rest of the 20% is all through private equity and the fund that Amanda Staveley runs. The intention of that is going to be to propel Newcastle United into the kind of top 6 to begin with, potentially the top 3. So Dan, I'll come to you on this first. Do you think that's going to be, of 2 things actually, I'm going to be naughty. What do you think about that takeover and that investment? And then secondly, to answer the point that Sam's making there, what do you think the impact of that is going to be on Manchester United?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, if we look at the numbers, I mean, that PIF fund it alone has an estimated asset value of around $500 billion. So it puts Newcastle as probably the richest club on the planet. Simple as. And then it's about, what next, which I think is kind of what you're alluding to. And Sam's question there around the models, I think is interesting. I think, sticking my neck out slightly, but I get a sense we might see something similar to the Manchester City model with Newcastle and PSG, and it being about, we've already heard rumours about them multiple club ownership, and Inter Milan and Marseille have been mentioned in that bracket. And that's what the City Football Group obviously started to do and is doing really well now. The other side of things is that Saudi Arabia are looking at getting into the airline business to start to compete with Emirates and Qatar, and you can see what's happened at City and PSG. So I think, it's early days, but we might see moves to that effect for Newcastle. Just in terms of the numbers, again, I know that fan base has been really, really upset with Mike Ashley and the way he's run the club, but actually the way he's run that club means that they are in a really good position now to invest, because they've had no losses apart from COVID. They've had really positive projections against FFP, or the Premier League's version of FFP. And if you take into account the adjustments with FFP and the acceptable losses, I'd estimate that they've got around 200 million that they could spend pretty comfortably without really touching the regulations. And I know that won't come overnight, but that will come over the period of 2, 3, 4 years maybe. So it will start to push them into that bracket. And obviously the risk is always that doesn't transfer into sporting success. But I think they'll go down that model of more of a Manchester City kind of route. And the impact then on Manchester United, as Sam was getting at, is, I'm not saying that Manchester United can't compete with that model, because we're talking about things today where quite clearly they can. And they're still one of the most dominant clubs on the planet, despite the dip in performance over the years, as you've mentioned, Rob. And they've still got this phenomenal brand value and fans all around the world. So I don't think it's a sense of that they won't be able to compete, but we are talking about very different ownership models and structures, and they can clash from time to time, which I think then kind of brings us back to, in the short term with Ronaldo, they'll be looking for this short-term boost in performance and on the pitch as much as anything. But the Newcastle deal will be, fascinating to see where that goes in the next 3 to 5 years. And they're already being bullish about, they want the Premier League title in 5 to 10 years. And with that money behind them, that's the kind of level that they're aiming at.
Yeah, you've made a really, really important point there. It's something that I think if you spoke to most Newcastle United fans, they have been broad agreement of their distaste for the Ashley ownership. But when you look at it purely objectively, 380 million quid's worth of his own money in, moved from a wages to turnover ratio, I think on takeover back in 2007 was about 170%, managed to work that down to 64%, profit making in the last couple of years, and I've got plenty of headroom in financial fair play. So if ever there was an owner that you want to gear up a club for investment that can be used, then I think he's done a superb job actually in that regard. And I think the parallel you draw with Man City is fair. I actually think it's a better deal than what Mansour inherited at Manchester City, because, and I'm not saying this as a red, the history of Newcastle United is much bigger than the history of Manchester City. The global position for me, albeit the last 10 years, Man City have obviously done a lot better. But I think that proposition for Newcastle arguably is better than it was back in 2008 when the Abu Dhabi royal family took over at Manchester City. So Jordan, coming to you, and I know this is now straying right off our pre-planned chat yesterday, but the news broke, didn't it? If you're representing some of the commercial side of Newcastle United, where do you think the big opportunities are for them? And I know that's a really naughty question because I haven't even prepped you for it. Oh, my
there you
fault.
go. I thought I had a big mute sign over my face, so I was
like, we apologise.
It's all good. I think it's really exciting. I think pretty much all of my social media feeds are filled with very amusing predicted lineups for Newcastle after the January transfer window. So apparently they're getting Mbappe, Haaland, Neymar. Maybe they'll even nick Ronaldo from United. Who knows? So I think in terms of that share of voice and that buzz, sport has a very short attention span because there's always something new. And I mean, this is the perfect example. We were planning a conversation on Ronaldo and Manchester United, and now there's suddenly a huge other news story in the world of sport, and that's almost hijacking our conversation. And that's what constantly happens. The conversation is hijacked. And so I think just leaning on the impact for United, that Ronaldo halo effect will probably run out. And if teams like Newcastle start investing, start winning, if you're a brand with budget and you're like, where am I going to put this? Which club is more exciting? Which club is likely to have more trophies at the end of the season? Which club is likely to kind of have more success and more of that share of voice? Big, exciting signings. You're probably going to start leaning towards Newcastle if it goes the way we're all kind of predicting it's going to go. So I do think that they suddenly become a big competitor in that space for Premier League partnerships, and they won't currently have those 24 global partners taken up. They will have opportunities and they will have gaps to bring partnerships on board, to bring bigger partnerships on board. So I think if you're sat in the commercial team at Newcastle at the moment, albeit I imagine the teams are being shaken up slightly, if you've been secured your job there in the commercial team at Newcastle, or you're sat in the commercial team at United, I think I'd fancy the Newcastle job at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, the stadium naming rights is the big ticket item that's probably the most obvious to change in the next 6 or 8 months, given that Ashley, to be fair to him, was trying to inject a little bit of capital through that mechanism. Dan's nodding.
Well, we were talking about fan backlash as an aside there, and remember the kickoff around the renaming of that stadium to the Sports Direct Arena, and the fans were adamant they weren't going to call it that, and they won't to this day. But there is an awful lot of money to be made throughout those kind of deals, and it'll be interesting to see the dynamic shift amongst the fan base. But I think Jordan's point there, I mean, Rob, how many times have we said this as well? Anything we're talking about, whether it's a commercial superstar or financial performance or changes at boardroom level or manager level, anything that goes around a football club. And Jordan, you said there, when things are going well and when teams are winning, it brings everybody together, and partners want to come on board, and things are great. That's the risk and reward, isn't it? Because, look, we're looking at Newcastle there as an example, but they are in the relegation zone, winless, and there'll be a little bit of short-term pressure there to deliver safety this season and then where they go next, which is where, to go back to the question, I suppose, some of the more established clubs that are in that space, Manchester United, Manchester City, have taken a few years to get there, but they won't be challenged just yet in the immediate term. But longer term, it'll be fascinating to see if Newcastle can break into that, what we term as the elite, or big six, big four, call it whatever we are nowadays. That's their target, and it will disrupt the market a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think I said to the Financial Times yesterday I was expecting top 4 inside 3 years. So let's see if that little crazy prophecy is true. We've had a couple of questions in the Q&A box. One of them is about the investment in Newcastle United and the sport washing project that it probably instigates to an extent. I think I'm just going to park it for the time being, not because I want to shirk the question, but I think there'll be a webinar very, very soon on that through InSport. So Jordan, I'm going to come to you with the only question I'm going to ask, actually, because I'm conscious of time, which comes from Adam.
Hey, Adam.
And it goes back to some of the commercial deal discussion that we were talking about earlier, and this notion of you've got to have 3 players to be able to activate and avoid some of the image rights stuff. So as a result of that, is it in Manchester United's interest to allow Ronaldo only to appear in commercial deals with, let's say, smaller names and retain the other larger names, your Varans, your Fernandes, your Sancho, etc., for other commercial deals, so that they don't dilute the value of the United brand outside of what Ronaldo can bring as an individual? Quite an interesting question, that. They'll probably go on for a little while. But, I mean, what do you think?
I think you'd probably upset a few people. I think the reason they'll do it, and quite frankly, a lot of this will all come down to money and how much those brands are spending. So United have to ultimately prioritize those brands that are spending the bigger amount of money. So if they turn around to them and say, sorry, you can't have Ronaldo, this small regional partnership over here can have Ronaldo, they'll be like, hang on, we're paying X times more per year. We should kind of get preferential treatment. So the sentiment's really nice, and like in an ideal world, that I think that would make sense, but we ultimately don't live in that world, and people pay for the right to stuff. So, and it's in their interest to protect those bigger, longer, higher paying partnerships. And as a result, they're probably going to do the opposite of what you suggested and actually lean towards the kind of bigger, shinier partnerships getting that access, and the others will probably get the trickle through and see what kind of comes out of that. So does that answer the question?
It doesn't just answer the question. It's a really nice way just to kind of draw a line under the headline of this entire webinar, which is, this kind of Ronaldo effect, the business that he may or may not be able to bring for Manchester United. But I think we've also explored some of those intricacies really nicely, and perhaps painted a picture that is not simply Ronaldo into Manchester United equals more money, but it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. They're going to have to work very hard to sign some new commercial deals. There's a limited number of inventories that they can realistically sell. There's going to be a lot of clashes with CR7 personal brand and Manchester United global brand, and I've learned a huge amount over the last 40 minutes. I thank you both so much for your time and your energy and your commitment to that discussion. It's been absolutely superb, and I'm sure that the audience have all really enjoyed it as well. Just a couple of things before we just finish up. You'll see at the bottom, if you're a regular of InSport, there's a little green button that talks about our other online sport business courses. We've got a few in the offing. We've got our Foundations in Sport Business series, which of course you can grab and you can consume at your own time. We've got a wonderful London experience coming up this month that includes visits to a range of different major sporting venues, including the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and the All England Tennis Club. So if you're interested in some of that and meeting some more of the team, please just click on that box and register your details. And Will and the guys at and Dan, the guys at InSport HQ, will be more than happy to have a chat with you about it. So the economics of Ronaldo's move to Manchester United is significant. Both Jordan and Dan there have taken us through a lovely journey about where the key challenges might be. I think the future is particularly bright for the partnership, and it's now down to the commercial people to really earn their coin, if you pardon the pun, to see how things might go. Dan, Jordan, huge thanks from me. I'm sure everybody is going to be busy frantically typing in the say something nice box now to also thank you. In true InSport education and crowdcast style, when I end this broadcast, you're just going to be dumped out. Don't take it personally. It's a process thing, and it's been wonderful talking to both of you. Thanks ever so much for your time. For everybody joining us today, there'll be more editions of our webinar series. Just keep an eye on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we will see you all again really soon. Thanks, folks. Take care. Have a good weekend.